We need to change gears for a few minutes. We need to talk about something that most people don't talk about in real estate. The one thing that most of us don't talk about is sexual harassment in the workplace. We can get in trouble with that also. Don't assume it's just men, because women can be guilty of sexually harassing someone as well. You see, they talk about that in every other industry except real estate. My wife works for the state of Texas, and once a year she has to go to a sexual harassment seminar. She always comes back and says that was the most boring thing ever. And I think, well, you could liven it up if you just had some actors and showed people what not to do. But she decided that wasn't funny. She says, well, that would be sexual harassment itself. So let's define something that is sexual harassment. It is something you do to make someone else uncomfortable of a sexual nature, but it has to be a repeated pattern. One sexual innuendo or joke is not enough to call sexual harassment. But if the person that is upset about the circumstance can show a repeated pattern, well, then it is sexual harassment. If a salesperson goes to their broker and complains and the broker does not do anything about the problem, that could also be a violation of the laws that deal with sexual harassment. So what is it you don't do? You just don't talk about sexual things around the people in your office. I don't care if they're the same sex as you or not. You just don't talk about those things. If you want to talk to somebody about sexual stuff, it needs to be a friend, and it needs to be somewhere else. And you're not going to leave suggestive material around on your desk at the office either. You need to think about this. There's more female brokers than there are male brokers in this business. And if anything, you could really get in trouble if somebody complained about the things you said. Now, I talked about this to one office in another town from where I practice real estate. It was 9 women and me. The broker was one of those women. And when this topic came up, the room just exploded, and all of the agents in the room talked about one fellow in the office that would say the most amazing things to when he would take an offer to somebody. Now, I'll negotiate a better price if you'll show me such and such. The broker had no idea that had been going on in her office. I think it was a most revealing moment for her, and she suddenly decided we need to have some new policies in this office concerning sexual harassment. My policy is worded very simply when it comes to this. If the broker decides that any agent in the office may be guilty of sexual harassment, their license will be sent back to Austin immediately. I don't have to prove them guilty. I don't have to take them to court. If somebody comes in and complains, that license is going back to Austin immediately. I am not going to let that be a problem in my office. Suggestive comments about touching people, rubbing people, dating people, doing things with people, all of those things fall into this category. Now remember, just doing it once is not sexual harassment. There has to be a repeated pattern about this. Well, what else can we get ourselves in trouble for? How about fair housing? We need to make sure we know who the protected classes are: color, race, religion, gender, familial status, and handicap. I already know how you feel about this. You're tired of talking about it. You know the world's in a better place than it used to be. And you know you're not going to discriminate against anybody because you want to get a commission off of everybody. I don't have a problem with that either. But in the midst of difficult negotiations, sometimes the bigotry that poor salesperson learned from their parents many years ago resurfaces again and becomes a problem all over again. We need to be very careful with what we say and how we negotiate. We need to make sure that we're not going to discriminate against anybody in the protected classes. Well, what about fair housing laws in terms of the local community? I hear that some local communities have passed laws that you cannot discriminate against same-sex couples. I don't know how your community is. You need to talk to your broker. You need to talk to the city hall, and you see if they have passed laws like that. I've even heard that some communities have passed laws because of the large university they have in their area. You cannot deny a college student if they want to rent one of your units. A lot of owners would be happy to deny college students being there because they know that there's going to be a party going on. In fact, one fella said, I'd rather rent to men than women college students because the men will always go somewhere else to party. Where do they go? They go to the women's place to do the partying. He thinks more properties are torn up by where the women live than by the men. I don't know if that's true or not, and I don't know what your community regulations are concerning college students, but you need to find that out before you start practicing property management. Now, when it comes to fair housing, ignore some old deed restrictions. Some of the deed restrictions from the 50s say some amazing things. They cannot be enforced. They say things like, no people of color, and they're not that polite about the way they say it, can buy in this area. I had one lady come to me. She showed me the deed restrictions for her subdivision. She says, I want this changed. I said, well, I don't know what you want to do. It can't be enforced. She says, I don't care. It's rude language. It shouldn't be in there. I said, well, you can go ahead and get everybody in the subdivision to vote that say you'd like to amend this, but the original copy of the deed restrictions are still at the courthouse, and they're not going to pull it out of the public records. So all you could do is just put an amendment into that. I haven't seen her since that day, so I don't know what she's done about that. Now, there are some people that you can discriminate against. You can discriminate against somebody that's too young to legally buy or sell a property, but someday they're going to be old enough. Wouldn't it be nice if they'd come back to you and talk to you about it when they get old enough? So treat them kindly. Oh, you can discriminate against somebody that does not have the funds necessary to buy a property, but someday they're going to get their finances in order. Wouldn't it be nice if they would come back to you and they would talk to you about real estate? So treat them kindly as well. That would make a lot of sense. Now, another law that we have to think about when we're looking at real estate and practicing this business is the American with Disabilities Act. This is especially true if you're practicing commercial real estate because you need to make sure that the properties that you're selling are in compliance with it, because chances are we're going to have to negotiate something throughout this conclusion of this transaction about who's going to repair what and when it's going to be done. We're talking about things like wheelchair ramps. We're talking about wider doors. We're talking about handicap access to restrooms. Simple things like that. Now let's define a disability so that we all understand exactly what a disability is. A disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a fundamental life activity. Now when they talk about life activities, they're talking about things like seeing and hearing and walking and earning and performing manual tasks and breathing and working. If you look at that list closely, everybody you know falls into disability somewhere along the way. My wife wears glasses, so she is disabled in the seeing category. She says, I can't hear her voice anymore, so I'm disabled in the hearing category. When it comes to walking, I can only go so far, and I can't do it anymore. When it comes to earning, I may be limited by what I can earn because I can only stay awake for so long. When it becomes performing manual tasks, I'm okay unless you ask me to dig a hole, or you ask me to rake a yard, or you ask me to climb a tree, and suddenly I have limitations. Breathing, oh, I can breathe okay until I jog for a while, and then suddenly breath gets hard to do. And working, I'm not too limited at that. I'm self-employed. I'm pretty good at finding work to do when I need to do work. Now we need to talk about one specific group of people. Some of you watching this video, you are actually involved with some of these people at your office, or they're working for you out of their home. They're called assistants. When a real estate agent gets busy enough, they need to think about hiring an assistant. The best assistant to have is the person that truly wants to see you succeed. Do you know who the person is that truly wants to see you succeed? It may not be your spouse. Some spouses of real estate agents ask the question, why do you stay in that stupid business you're in? The one person that truly wants to see you succeed is your mother. Oh, I got lucky when I became a broker. Answering machines were brand new in those days. You remember those days when you called and a machine answered? You didn't want to talk to it, so you hung up. I'd go out and show property. And when I got back to the office and played my messages, all I heard was a series of clicks. So I hired my mother to be my assistant. She worked for me 3 days a week. She was there at the office to answer the phones while I was out showing property. She did all of the work that she could, but because she didn't have a real estate license, she was limited by some of the things that she could do. Now, before we continue talking about assistants, we need to make sure we understand who has to have a real estate license. A person who directly helps another to buy, sell, or lease real property, they need to have a real estate license. A person who procures or assists in procuring prospects to buy, sell, or lease property needs to have a real estate license. And a person who procures or assists in procuring properties to be bought, sold, or leased needs to have a real estate license. So let's keep it simple. You with your license are the negotiator. Your assistant can do a lot of grunt work for you, but they're not going to be negotiating contracts.